Clara had never known a winter as cruel as this one. The small farm she had inherited from her late husband, once a place of laughter and hope, now groaned under the weight of heavy snow, the barns creaking and swaying like fragile bones under the relentless assault of wind and ice. Each day was a battle, every chore a test of endurance, and every glance at her young daughter Emily reminded her of the stakes she could not afford to lose. Emily, 6 years old and full of unfiltered curiosity, clutched a thin, worn blanket around her tiny shoulders, shivering despite the sputtering fire that barely kept the cabin's cold at bay. Clara moved from room to room, her hands raw from chores, her mind racing with the unrelenting thought that if she failed, social services would arrive and the authorities would take her daughter away, leaving her alone in the silence of an unforgiving winter. There was fear in every heartbeat, exhaustion in every breath, and a gnawing sense of isolation that made the world seem impossibly large and cruel. Then, as if conjured by fate, a figure appeared on the horizon, a lone cowboy riding a sturdy horse kicking up clouds of frost with each step, approached with the ease and confidence of someone utterly familiar with hardship, yet untouched by despair. Jack was his name, though whispers in the small town spoke of him as a wandering man with a heart both generous and untamed, a man whose words could wound or heal, whose humor was as sharp as his mind. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed eyes that seemed to see into the marrow of people's souls. And as he dismounted, his boots crunching against the frozen earth, there was a sense of inevitability in his presence, as though Clara's desperate prayers had been answered in a man whose life, like the prairie he traveled, was open, wide, and full of possibility. Jack's gaze lingered on the struggling mother and child, noting the exhaustion etched into Clara's face, the way Emily's small frame trembled against the thin blanket. With a voice low, rough, and teasing, he offered his help with the stubborn hay bales. And then, as if daring the universe itself to judge him, he spoke the words that would mark the turning point in their lives. "Your daughter needs a home, and my bed needs you." The sentence hung in the frosty air. Part est, part challenge, part invitation, carrying with it an ambiguity that made Clara's pulse quicken, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and an instinctive recognition that this man was offering more than shelter. He was offering survival, connection, and a strange, unspoken promise of something deeper. Her mind raced with possibilities and warnings alike, the world narrowing to the dilemma before her. Could she trust a stranger whose life seemed as untethered and unpredictable as the winds sweeping across the snow-covered fields? Yet whose offer was the only lifeline she and Emily had? Tentatively, driven by necessity and a mother's fierce love, Clara agreed to Jack's offer. Leading Emily to his cabin, a sturdy wooden structure emanating the smell of wood smoke, leather, and the faint musk of horses, Clara felt a wave of relief, tinged with lingering suspicion. Inside, the warmth of the hearth met them, flickering shadows dancing along walls lined with well-used tools, saddles, and the quiet remnants of a life lived alone. The first night was awkward, filled with silences and small, careful gestures. Jack stacking firewood, Clara preparing a simple supper, Emily exploring her new surroundings with wide-eyed wonder, her laughter tentative yet bright. As days passed, trust began to form in small increments. Jack's humor, blunt yet kind, softened the edges of Clara's fear, while she witnessed the quiet discipline with which he cared for his animals, tended the land, and, without overt acknowledgement, looked out for her daughter. Conflict arose naturally. Whispers of gossip among neighbors questioned Clara's choices, hinting at impropriety or scandal, while Jack grappled with shadows of his own past, scars of loss and loneliness that made intimacy both terrifying and irresistible. The three of them navigated this fragile ecosystem of survival, suspicion, and budding trust, their interactions rich with tension, small triumphs, and subtle gestures of care. Emily thrived in this environment, her laughter echoing through the cabin and fields, a living, breathing testament to the possibility of warmth in even the coldest circumstances. Slowly, Clara began to see past Jack's brash humor and saw the steady, unspoken courage beneath, his willingness to protect them, to provide shelter, and to form a bond without expectation of perfection. By winter's end, the cabin transformed from a simple refuge into a home. The phrase Jack had spoken weeks before, audacious and shocking in its candor, evolved in Clara's heart into something entirely different. It became a symbol of trust, companionship, and the courage to accept help when it mattered most. They had formed a new kind of family, stitched together not by blood alone but by shared hardship, quiet sacrifices, and the slow, tender unfolding of mutual affection. And as the first shoots of spring pushed through the frozen soil outside, Clara watched Emily playing in the sun-dappled snowmelt while Jack leaned against the doorway, hands in pockets, a rare smile touching his lips. She realized with a mix of relief and wonder that love, hope, and even laughter could flourish in the most unexpected places, that family could be chosen as much as it could be born, and that the wild, unpredictable path of a wandering cowboy had somehow led her and her daughter to a home filled with warmth, safety, and a future they had almost given up hoping for. Clara had grown accustomed to the bitter loneliness of her farm, yet nothing in her years of struggle had prepared her for the blizzard that descended one late afternoon, turning the world outside into an impenetrable wall of white, snow, and wind lashing against the wooden structures with relentless fury. Emily clung to her mother, eyes wide with fear as the gale whistled through cracks in the cabin, carrying the icy promise of danger. Clara's heart pounded not only from the chill, but from the terror of failing her daughter once again. Food and firewood were dangerously low, and the possibility of being trapped here without help filled her with dread. It was then, in the midst of this unforgiving storm, that Jack appeared, like a mirage shaped by the wind and the snow. A lone cowboy, riding with the certainty of someone who had faced countless trials, yet carried himself with an almost supernatural calm. His horse's hooves kicked up clouds of frozen mist, and his coat was dusted with snowflakes clinging to the creases and folds like tiny crystals. Even through the storm, his gaze found Clara and Emily, steady, assessing, and filled with that unspoken promise of protection. Jack's presence was startling and at first unnerving, his figure cutting through the white haze like a dark silhouette against the blinding snow. Clara's instincts told her to lock the door, to keep this stranger at a distance, yet a mother's desperation has a way of softening skepticism. When Jack dismounted and offered his hand, carrying not just warmth but the knowledge that he could weather the storm and bring them to safety, Clara hesitated only a moment before deciding that the risk was worth it. She wrapped Emily in the thickest blankets they owned, and together they followed him through the swirling snow, trudging over frozen ground that threatened to swallow their feet with each step. The journey to his cabin was treacherous. Gusts of wind bent the trees, snow clung to their eyelashes and hair, and the cold seemed determined to penetrate their bones. Yet Jack moved with a quiet authority, guiding them without rush, his presence both commanding and reassuring. He cracked jokes with rough humor, teasing Emily gently to keep her spirits up, and Clara could not help but notice the kindness in his voice, a steady thread of safety woven through words that might have otherwise seemed crude or blunt. Once, inside the cabin, they found themselves in a small but sturdy refuge. The warmth from the fire was immediate, a living contrast to the frozen world outside, and the smell of burning wood mingled with leather, hay, and a faint trace of the open prairie. Jack worked swiftly, stacking more firewood, securing the windows against the wind and ensuring that Emily had a place to sit close to the hearth. Clara, though exhausted and wary, observed him with a mixture of awe and relief. She realized that Jack's earlier audacious words, "Your daughter needs a home, and my bed needs you," were, in this moment, imbued with a deeper meaning. He was offering not just shelter, but unwavering support and a lifeline when the world seemed determined to take everything from them. The storm outside mirrored the storm in Clara's heart, the uncertainty of trusting a stranger clashing with the undeniable truth that without him, they might not survive the night. Over the coming days, as the storm raged and snow drifted high, against the cabin walls tension mounted in ways both external and internal. Clara faced whispers from the few townsfolk brave enough to venture out, their judgmental glances and subtle innuendos reminding her that society was quick to condemn, slow to understand. Jack, for his part, wrestled with shadows from his past, losses, betrayals, and a lifetime spent keeping his heart locked away. His rugged independence a shield against pain. The cabin became a crucible for trust. Nights spent huddled by the fire, repairing fences, tending animals, and sharing meals that were meager but made meaningful by shared labor. Emily thrived despite the chaos, her laughter a bright note in a symphony of tension, her innocence a reminder to both adults of what was truly at stake. Slowly, Clara and Jack discovered the rhythms of each other's lives, small routines and gestures of care building bridges across fear and hesitation. The emotional climax arrived during a particularly fierce night when the cabin was threatened by the weight of snow on the roof and the fire nearly died. Jack and Clara worked side by side, moving timber, reinforcing beams and lifting Emily to safety above the danger. In that adrenaline-fueled struggle, Clara saw the depth of Jack's courage, the fierce protectiveness that extended beyond mere survival into something profoundly human and tender. They shared a quiet moment afterward, breathless and covered in snow-dusted soot, realizing that what they had been building together was no longer just about shelter. It was about trust, hope, and the fragile, exhilarating beginnings of love. By the time the storm subsided, leaving the world outside glistening with ice and the first tentative light of dawn peeking through clouds, Clara understood that Jack had given her and Emily more than a temporary haven. He had given them a future, a bond that could withstand harsh winters and human judgment alike. The phrase that had startled her weeks ago, the bold assertion about his bed, had matured into a symbol of family, protection, and shared courage, proving that sometimes the most audacious words carry the deepest truths. And as the first rays of sunlight reflected off the sparkling snow, Emily laughing and chasing her shadow across the yard, Clara looked at Jack with new understanding, gratitude, and the flickering, undeniable spark of something neither of them had expected, a love born from survival, trust, and the quiet heroism of a single cowboy who had arrived just when the world seemed determined to take everything away. Clara's life had always been one of quiet struggle, but the arrival of Jack, the rugged single cowboy, had brought an unexpected warmth into the cold emptiness of her days. For the first time in months, Emily laughed freely, chasing her small shadow across the frost-bitten fields, oblivious to the judgmental eyes of the sparse townsfolk who still whispered from behind curtained windows. Yet even in this fragile cocoon of newfound hope, danger and uncertainty lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. The townspeople, aware of Jack's blunt humor and unconventional ways, viewed Clara's association with him with suspicion, their gossip growing louder with every day that passed. They hinted that Clara's desperation had led her to compromise herself, and that Emily's safety might be at risk, not from the harsh elements, but from the unconventional arrangement they now shared. Clara felt the sting of judgment deeply, the whispered accusations cutting into her pride and self-worth, even as she knew in her heart that Jack's presence had saved her daughter and herself from a fate far worse than gossip. Jack, for his part, had faced judgment all his life. A man of few words and broad shoulders, he carried the weight of solitude, loss, and disappointment like armor. Yet beneath the rugged exterior and playful arrogance, there was a man who had survived countless trials and now faced a test unlike any before, to prove that his intentions were pure, that he could be trusted with Clara and Emily's fragile lives. He worked tirelessly alongside Clara, repairing fences, hauling firewood, and tending animals through biting winds, all the while engaging Emily with stories of wide-open prairies, mischievous foxes, and the rhythm of life on the frontier. It was in these moments of shared labor and storytelling that trust began to bloom, tentative at first like frost-kissed buds, but growing steadily as Clara witnessed the quiet consistency of Jack's care. She saw how he instinctively protected Emily from the cold, how he noticed the small things she herself overlooked, and how his humor, once brash, now carried warmth and reassurance rather than mischief. The tension escalated one afternoon when a traveling inspector arrived in town, sent by social services after an anonymous tip that Clara and Emily were living in unsafe conditions. The inspector, a stern man with a sharp gaze, demanded to see Clara's home and questioned the propriety of a single mother staying with a cowboy. Clara's stomach churned with fear. She worried that Emily would be taken, that the fragile stability they had begun to build would be ripped away in an instant. Jack, sensing her panic, did not hesitate. With a steady voice, he explained the situation honestly, emphasizing the care, safety, and comfort he provided to both Clara and Emily, refusing to bow to the inspector's thinly veiled skepticism. It was a tense confrontation, one where every word and gesture carried weight. Clara felt her pulse hammering in her chest as she watched Jack navigate the bureaucracy with calm authority. The man she had feared and questioned moments ago now becoming the unshakable anchor in her life. Amid this external threat, Clara wrestled with internal dilemmas as well. The intimacy Jack offered, through shared labor, quiet conversations by the fire, and the protective care he showed Emily, stirred emotions she had long suppressed. Attraction, admiration, and a longing for companionship. Yet fear, shame, and lingering skepticism created a barrier she could not yet cross. Each glance, each touch, and each shared laugh became a subtle dance of trust and restraint, a careful negotiation of hearts and morals. She worried that her feelings might cloud her judgment, that the safety of Emily could be compromised by the pull of desire or the boldness of Jack's words. But slowly, as they worked side by side, faced the scrutiny of their neighbors, and navigated the harsh realities of frontier life, Clara began to understand that love did not negate responsibility. Rather, it enhanced it, giving courage, resilience, and strength to protect and nurture those she cared for most. Emily, perceptive beyond her years, noticed the tension yet thrived in the warmth of this unconventional family. She clung to Jack with innocent affection, seeing him not as a stranger but as a protector, a source of stories, laughter, and security. In her eyes, the cabin became a fortress against the cold, the wind, and the doubts of the outside world. Her laughter, bright and unfiltered, became the anchor for both adults, a reminder that their efforts were not in vain, that every act of courage, honesty, and love mattered profoundly. The story reaches its emotional apex during a night when the wind howled so fiercely that the cabin seemed to shudder under the storm. Jack and Clara were forced to work together to secure the home against the onslaught, hauling logs, reinforcing windows, and tending to Emily, who had woken frightened by the storm. In the candlelit interior, illuminated by the flickering fire, Clara saw Jack's unwavering determination and realized that trust, once earned, could transcend fear, judgment, and uncertainty. Their hands brushed as they carried supplies, their eyes met, and a silent acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition of shared struggle, mutual respect, and a bond that had grown stronger than any external threat. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world sparkling under a thin layer of frost, and Clara felt for the first time in many months that hope was not just possible, it was tangible. Jack's audacious line, once shocking and mischievous, had now taken on a profound meaning. It symbolized not desire alone, but courage, protection, and the willingness to build a family not born of circumstance, but chosen through trust, loyalty, and love. Clara looked at Jack, Emily skipping happily at their feet, and understood that they had survived not only the storm outside, but the storms within themselves and their community. In that quiet golden morning, Clara felt a sense of peace and belonging she had never imagined possible. Together, they had created a sanctuary, a home, and the first fragile threads of a love that could endure any challenge, proving that even in the harshest winters, warmth, trust, and hope could flourish when hearts were brave enough to embrace them. Clara had begun to believe that life, harsh as it was, had finally offered her a glimmer of hope. The cabin, once cold and empty, now hummed with warmth. The fire crackled. Emily's laughter filled the rooms, and Jack's presence, steady and reassuring, brought a sense of safety she had not known in months. Yet the frontier was a place where peace was fleeting, and danger often came without warning. One late afternoon, while Clara and Emily were tending to the small vegetable garden poking through the thawing soil, they noticed a group of men from a neighboring settlement approaching with an aggressive, unfamiliar energy. The men, known for their greed and ruthlessness, had long coveted Clara's land, seeing the farm as a prize rather than a home. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She knew that alone she and Emily would be helpless against such intruders. Panic surged through her, yet a spark of courage flickered as Jack appeared, moving like a shadow through the fields, his horse kicking up dirt and snow as he positioned himself between the threat and his makeshift family. Jack's boldness was both frightening and comforting. He faced the men with a mixture of controlled fury and measured negotiation, his voice low but carrying the authority of a man who had lived in the wild long enough to understand both survival and morality. Clara, standing behind Emily, felt fear and admiration in equal measure. She had feared strangers before, yet Jack's presence transformed the situation. The fear of the men was replaced by confidence in the man who had become her protector. The confrontation escalated as one of the intruders made a threatening move toward Emily. Time seemed to stretch, the air heavy with tension, the wind stirring dust and loose straw, while Clara's mind raced with the impossible choice between flight and defense. Jack acted with swift precision, intercepting the intruder and using a combination of physical skill, cunning, and sheer presence to force the men back, asserting a dominance that was both terrifying and admirable. In that moment, Clara saw the depth of Jack's courage, not just physical, but moral. His willingness to put himself in harm's way to protect those he cared for, and she felt her own fear shift into a fierce, protective love. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the emotional tension between Clara and Jack deepened. The danger had reminded them both of the fragility of life on the frontier, and the urgent need to trust and rely on one another. Jack, usually so composed and confident, showed vulnerability in quiet moments. A hand brushing Emily's hair back from her forehead. A hesitant smile shared with Clara as they watched her sleep safely in her bed. Clara, whose walls had been hardened by years of struggle, found herself responding with warmth she had never allowed before, feeling the stirrings of love and gratitude mingled with awe at his bravery. Emily, sensing the tension and resolution between the adults, became a symbol of hope and connection, her joy a fragile but powerful force that bound them together. The farm itself, once merely a setting for survival, transformed under their collective effort into a fortress of security and home. Together, they repaired fences, reinforced the barn, and cleared the paths through the fields, their labor a tangible manifestation of the trust and care they were building. Jack's earlier audacious words, "Your daughter needs a home and my bed needs you," now carried a layered significance. They were not only an invitation, but a promise of safety, love, and the creation of a family bound by choice and courage. Clara realized that accepting Jack had been a leap of faith, and in facing both human threats and the unpredictable forces of nature, they had emerged stronger, united by shared struggle and an unspoken but powerful bond. By the time twilight descended over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara, Emily, and Jack stood together on the porch, gazing across the fields that had been both a battleground and a sanctuary. The wind had calmed, the intruders were gone, and the world seemed momentarily at peace. Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet joy. She understood now that life on the frontier was uncertain, but it was also rich with the possibility of love, courage, and connection forged in adversity. Emily, safe and laughing in the glow of the firelight, was the living proof that even in the harshest, most unforgiving places, family could be built from trust, bravery, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. In that moment, Jack reached for Clara's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, and she realized that the strange, bold words he had spoken weeks ago had come to symbolize everything they now shared: shelter, protection, love, and the unshakable promise of a future together. A future that neither the harsh winter, the judgment of townsfolk, nor the threat of outsiders could ever take away. Winter had finally loosened its grip on the frontier, leaving behind a landscape sparkling with frost and the promise of spring. Clara stood on the porch of her small cabin, Emily at her side, both of them wrapped in thick blankets, watching the first sunlight dance across fields that had endured storms, intruders, and countless nights of uncertainty. The farm, once a place of struggle and desperation, had transformed into a sanctuary, a testament to resilience, courage, and the unexpected power of human connection. Jack, leaning casually against the doorway, watched them with a faint smile, the morning light catching in his weathered features, highlighting the lines carved by years of hardship and the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior. The air was crisp and full of possibility, and for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to breathe without fear, her heart lighter with the knowledge that she and Emily were truly safe. The days leading up to this morning had been filled with quiet triumphs and tender revelations. Clara had come to understand the depth of Jack's care through countless small acts. The way he noticed Emily's favorite toys scattered on the floor, the way he repaired the barn roof after the last storm, and the way he insisted she rest while he handled chores that had once left her exhausted and alone. Emily's laughter had become a constant, brightening even the coldest mornings, and Clara realized that this child's joy was both a reward and a reminder of what had been at stake. Yet more than physical safety, Jack had offered something far more profound: the promise of emotional security, a life where love and trust could flourish alongside survival. Clara reflected on the journey they had shared, the blizzards that tested their endurance, the moral dilemmas that challenged her heart, the intrusion of greedy neighbors and skeptical townsfolk, and the shadow of social services that had once threatened to separate her from her daughter. Each trial had brought them closer together, forging a bond stronger than any fear, any storm, or any human judgment. Jack, too, had revealed himself gradually, a man of principle and courage, whose blunt humor concealed tenderness, whose solitary life had left him yearning for connection, and whose presence had been a lifeline when the world seemed determined to take everything away. Together they had learned to trust, to care, and to love in ways neither had anticipated. The emotional culmination of their story came one afternoon when Clara and Jack walked through the fields, Emily skipping ahead like a bright comet of joy. Jack stopped beside Clara, taking her hand in his, and for a long moment neither spoke, letting the wind carry their shared memories. Nights of firelight, whispered conversations, tense confrontations, and quiet victories. Finally, Jack's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. He spoke not of audacious humor but of promises of the future, of a family they had built together. Clara, feeling the warmth of his hand, the strength of his gaze, and the depth of his devotion, knew without doubt that this man, whose arrival had seemed like a whim of fate, was now the anchor of their lives. Emily ran back to them, laughing and breathless, and in that moment the three of them formed a tableau of hope, resilience, and belonging. The farm, now brimming with life, symbolized more than survival. It was proof of what courage, trust, and love could achieve. Jack's audacious line, spoken weeks ago, "Your daughter needs a home, and my bed needs you," had matured into a symbol of family, protection, and enduring love. It was no longer a daring proposition but a promise fulfilled. Clara, standing beside him, felt the full weight of that transformation, from desperation to security, from fear to trust, from isolation to a chosen family that could face any challenge together. Spring flowers began to bloom in the garden. The barn door swung freely in the gentle breeze, and Emily's laughter echoed across the fields, a living affirmation of the love and hope that now defined their lives. As the sun rose higher, bathing the cabin in warm light, Clara looked at Jack and Emily, her heart overflowing with gratitude, relief, and joy. She understood that life on the frontier would always hold uncertainties, but together, they had created a fortress of warmth, trust, and connection that no storm, no intrusion, and no harsh word could ever undo. In that golden morning, with Emily dancing among the new shoots of spring, Clara felt a profound certainty. They were a family, not by chance but by courage, choice, and love. And in that certainty she found peace, the kind of peace that comes from surviving the coldest winters, weathering the fiercest storms, and discovering that the wild, untamed paths of life could lead to a home filled with laughter, safety, and the unwavering promise of a new dawn.